Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
And I'm Millicent Walker. Here are the headlines. US President Joe Biden accuses Russia of committing genocide in Ukraine as Ukraine investigates use of chemical weapons by Russian forces in the city of Mariupol.
And police in New York are on the hunt for a person of interest in the shooting at a subway station on 36th Street.
Last, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson apologises again for attending those lockdown parties a day after being slammed with a fine by the Met Police.
Thanks for joining us today. Let's begin with U.S. President Joe Biden accusing Russian forces of committing acts of genocide in Ukraine. President Biden has been known to have called the Russian president's names over the last few weeks, even accusing President Putin of war crimes.
In another development, Ukraine has been dismissing reports that over 1,000 soldiers surrendered to Russian forces in the city of Mariupol, saying instead that the city's defense system has increased and strengthened. Russia had initially claimed that over 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers have laid down their arms in the city, referring to a group from 36th Marine Brigade near the Lyach Iron and Steel Works.
It's, however, almost impossible to get food in Mariupol as the shelling and bombing never stops. At least 100,000 civilians are still left in the city, and once again on the front burner, the use of chemical weapons in the war in Ukraine. The Russian embassy in the United States has criticized what it calls provocative statements made by a U.S. government official, Ned Price, who warned of Russia possibly using chemical weapons in Ukraine. Price had told a press briefing on Tuesday, Russia has a track record. Russia has used these agents on their own people.
You left off.
U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price, addressing a news conference on Tuesday, said Russia's forces may be using a variety of riot control agents in Ukraine.
Russia's forces may use a variety of riot control agents, and that includes tear gas mixed with chemical agents that would cause stronger symptoms as part of the effort to weaken and incapacitate entrenched Ukrainian fighters and even civilians as part of its campaign to take Mariupol.
But Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the United States is not in a position to confirm reports of use of chemical weapons in Ukraine and is working to determine what actually happened in Mariupol.
So when it comes to the reports you're referring to, we're not in a position to confirm anything. I don't think the Ukrainians are either.
Chemical weapons production, use and stockpiling is banned under the 1997 Chemical Weapons Convention. Although condemned by human rights groups, white phosphorus is not banned under the convention. However, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in an address to the Estonian parliament via teleconferencing, said that Russia was using phosphorus bombs in Ukraine, accusing Moscow of using terror tactics against civilians. He did not provide evidence to support his accusation. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden on Tuesday said the Russian president is committing genocide as he unveiled plans to extend the availability of higher biofuel blends of gasoline during the summer to curb soaring fuel costs and to cut reliance on foreign energy sources.
Your family budget, your ability to fill up your tank, none of it should hinge on whether a dictator declares war and commits genocide in half a world away. To help deal with this Putin price hike, I've authorized the release of 1 million barrels per day for the next 6 months from our Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This is by far the largest release of our national reserve in history. It's a wartime bridge to increase oil supply as we work with U.S. oil producers to ramp up their production this year.
The move represents the administration's latest attempt to tamp down inflation, which hit a new 40-year high on Tuesday. Later, as it prepared to board Air Force One to return to Washington after an event on the economy in Iowa, President Biden said he stood by his characterization of Russia's actions in Ukraine as genocide. The battle for the besieged port city of Mariupol reached a decisive phase on Tuesday. Ahead of an anticipated Russian offensive, Ukrainian Marines have been holed up in Azovstal, industrial district, the only area they still control in Mariupol. Should the Russians seize the area, they will be in full control of Mariupol, the only connection between Russian-held areas to the west and east.
Окупації міста Буча російськими військами людей розстрілювали на місці.
Meanwhile, the head of Bucha prosecutors team, Ruslan Kravchenko, has vowed to get everyone who committed bloody crimes against peaceful civilians in the town of Bucha, as more bodies are exhumed at the site of a mass grave. The discovery of so many slain civilians after the withdrawal of Russian forces from the town has stirred a global outcry. Kiev is investigating them as war crimes, but Moscow has denied responsibility and accuses Ukraine of trying to smear it.
And we had mentioned on Tuesday, Sweden and Finland were considering membership into NATO. Today, Sweden's defense minister, Peter Hultqvist, says his country would consider the option of joining the military alliance, and that a group led by Foreign Minister Anna Lindh would report on the options in May. Sweden's ruling Social Democrat Party, which has until now rejected membership of NATO, is reviewing its international security policy in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Social Democrats, the biggest party in parliament and who form minority government, have consistently rejected calls to join NATO, arguing that military non-alignment has served the country well.
This has also in Sweden created a situation we have that we have started then a new security analysis of what we should do. We should in a group under the leadership of the Foreign Minister Anna Lindh, we are now analyzing all security options for Sweden. NATO membership is one of the options, but there is also other options we will analyze. We will come with a report in the middle or in the end of May, how we should do in the future. The reason why this happened is not Finland's, what they are doing. The reason is what Russia are doing, that they have started a war in Ukraine. That's the fundamental thing, 100%. They are the bad guys. They are doing the bad things that we have to react on in some way.
Joining us now to discuss this further is Sweden's ambassador to Nigeria, Ambassador Carl Michael Grants. Thank you for joining us on the program today, Ambassador.
Thank you for inviting.
Where does Sweden stand, Ambassador, in the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Well, I mean, we have condemned in the very strongest terms this military aggression and invasion. First time since the Second World War that a European country invades another country. We're still in a state of shock, I would say, in Sweden and the entire Europe of the Russian aggression.
And what type of support is, if any, is Sweden providing to Ukraine at this time?
Well, I mean, Sweden has been supporting Ukraine for a long time. Since independence in 1991, we have supported about 400 million euros in different ways throughout the years. But of course, with the Russian aggression and invasion starting on the 24th of February, we have stepped up considerably, I would say. And for the very first time since 1939, we have offered and given weapons to a country in a military conflict. Last time that was to Finland in 1939 when they were invaded by Russia at the time, that is the Soviet Union. But now we have given 10,000 anti-tank weapons to Ukraine. So, and of course we step also with financial support, 50 million euros to the Ukrainian armed forces. And then, of course, for humanitarian aid, just about a week ago, the Swedish government earmarked, so to speak, 1 billion euros for humanitarian aid, not least for the refugees now coming into Europe and also to Sweden.
Ambassador Grants, does Sweden intend to join NATO?
Well, we all just listened to the Swedish Minister of Defense, Mr. Hultqvist, saying that we are considering different options at the time. in very close cooperation with Finland. As you know, the Prime Minister, Sanna Marin of Finland, is in Stockholm, the Swedish capital, today. So both Finland and Sweden have a history of being neutral and non-aligned. And now we have to very quickly make a new analysis of the situation, because the situation is completely new with this war going on, horrendous pictures and videos that we get from Ukraine. So we have to make an analysis of this, also together with the opposition parties in Sweden. There's a broad discussion, I would say, in Sweden at the moment about joining NATO or not.
But does Sweden consider what Russia is doing in Ukraine, Russia as a threat to Sweden's existence as a sovereign state?
Well, for the time being, we can't see any, existential threat to Sweden or to Finland, for that matter, I think. But things can change so very quickly. That is a lesson learned, I think, during the last few months. So we have to prepare for every outcome. And there have been threats, oral threats from the Kremlin to both Sweden and Finland to prevent us from joining NATO. Very unclear, but, there would be repercussions if Sweden would join the NATO. So we feel the pressure, but the decision is ours, as the minister said. The government and the parliament and the Swedish people.
So one of those threats, of course, that you're mentioning is the one from the Kremlin, which has responded to the possibility of Sweden and Finland joining NATO. And I know that the Finnish Prime Minister, whom we'll listen to in just a minute, did talk about Finland deciding in the next few weeks, over the next few weeks, about whether or not the country will be joining NATO. You don't think that the Russian government could carry out the threat of, also targeting Sweden and possibly Finland in light of, this information, the possibility that these two countries could be joining NATO, despite everything Mr. Putin has said about NATO expansion in the East?
Well, it depends on how you define threat, because you can threat in different ways. Military threat, military invasion, no. We can't see that happening, I think. But we have seen cyber attacks in Sweden and in Finland. There were some drones all of a sudden very close to Swedish nuclear power stations just a couple of months ago. So we can see the signs, someone is telling us that don't do this. And then, as the minister just said, we have to make this decision on our own. But in close cooperation with Finland. And they are in the same position, of course, being neutral since the Second World War.
There's so much going on in Ukraine at the moment. Mariupol is almost going under and could be falling to the Russian forces, according to reports that we're hearing. And, all the deaths that have happened, the destruction in Ukraine. Some are wondering if it is time for NATO really to send forces into, boots on the ground into Ukraine at the moment. Do you think that NATO can face up to Russia? Because I know that the fear here is that this could, blow up into a Third World War.
Yes, I shouldn't tell, because Sweden is not a member of NATO. You have to ask the NATO countries, actually. But, when we listen to State Secretary Blinken, he has been very clear, I think, that NATO or the US does not want to be dragged into a bigger conflict. And that's why NATO so far has refused to protect the airspace of the Ukraine, very much needed and asked for by Zelensky, President Zelensky and others. That is exactly the reason why. That could mean, if there is a clash, if you protect an airspace, you have to perhaps fight against aircrafts, and then eventually that could lead to a bigger military conflict between Russia and NATO, the NATO countries. And frankly, no one wants that kind of situation.
Ambassador Granz, and this is perhaps to ask about your thoughts. The Social Democrats, the biggest party in Parliament who form minority government, they've, rejected, or rather, well, calls to join NATO. It will be a big task convincing them, yes, with the decision that Sweden takes eventually to joining the alliance of NATO, wouldn't it?
Well, as you know, the history, I think neutrality and non-alignment has been very important, not least for the Social Democrats in Sweden. But on the other hand, we have the opposition parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals. They have been promoting Swedish NATO membership for a long time. But now we can see discussions within two big parties, the Social Democrats that you mentioned, but also the Sweden Democrats, the third biggest party in Sweden. They were very reluctant, or have been actually against NATO membership. But in both these two big parties, there are discussions going on, and it's sometimes difficult for me, being in Nigeria, to follow, because it's so quick. The developments are so very rapid. But we will see in the end, as Minister Hultqvist said, what the decision will be before summer.
And the decision from Finland as well, as both countries decide to take these decisions together. Ambassador Carl Michael Granz, thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you so much for inviting.
And so Finland, on the other hand, says it must be prepared for all kinds of actions from Russia should it decide to join NATO. The country's Prime Minister, Sanna Marin, earlier today said Finland would make a decision whether to apply to join NATO over the next few weeks. She was speaking at a press conference alongside her Swedish counterpart. Ms. Marin said it would be a good thing if the two countries take similar security choices in the future along a similar timetable. Finland and Sweden are close partners with NATO, but have shied away from joining the 30-member alliance founded in 1949 to counter the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
But there are different perspectives to apply NATO membership or not to apply, and we have to analyze all of these very carefully, as Magdalena said, and we will have the discussions within the Finnish parliament upcoming weeks. But I think our process will be quite fast. It will happen in weeks, as I mentioned.
I think you really must analyze the new situation, do it very seriously, think about the consequences, the pros and cons of all potential ways forward, and I think you have to be very serious in this work. This is exactly where we are right now. Finland just made their redogörelse, and we are now having the discussions with the parties in the Swedish parliament. We also have a dialogue within my party. I wanted to have take this serious situation very seriously, and then we make a decision. No, I'm saying we have to analyze the situation to see what is best for Sweden's security, for the Swedish people in this new situation. And you shouldn't rush into that. You should make it very seriously. That is how I work as the Swedish Prime Minister.
Still ahead on the program. Londoners dismayed after British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his finance minister are slammed with fines for breaching COVID restrictions. Stay with us.
Welcome back. Police in New York have named a person of interest in the shooting at a subway station on Tuesday. He has been named as 62-year-old Frank R. James and are asking anyone with information on his whereabouts to call a hotline. James has not been named as a suspect in the attack. However, being identified as a person of interest means police believe he may have information concerning the crime.
We can't hear him. He's talking.
Police mounted an intense manhunt for the gunman who set off 2 smoke bombs and opened fire in a New York subway car. injuring at least 20 people in a moving rush hour attack that prompted new calls to fight a surge of violence in the city's mass transit system. Police said the gunman was believed to have acted alone and immediately fled the crime scene. The attack unfolded as a Manhattan-bound subway train on the N line was pulling into an underground station in Brooklyn's Sunset Park neighborhood. 10 people were hit directly by gunfire, including 5 hospitalized in critical but stable condition. 13 more people suffered from smoke inhalation or were otherwise injured in the chaos as panicked riders fled the smoke-filled subway car. Some collapsed to the pavement as they poured onto the platform of the 36th Street station. The fire department said 2 of those hurt were treated at the scene. 15-year-old John Boutsikaris was riding the R subway train en route to school when the incident happened.
I was on 36th Street, I'm going to school, and the train conductor told everyone to get on the train, and I didn't know what happened. It was a scary moment. And then at 25th Street, we're all told to get off. There was people screaming for medical assistance. It was just a scary moment. Everyone was packed together, and I didn't know what happened until after.
This eyewitness video showed moments the shooting happened. Police said all of the victims were expected to survive their injuries. The New York Police Department Commissioner, Keishan Sewell, said a U-Haul van believed to be connected to the shooting was later located in Brooklyn, but the perpetrator remained at large several hours after the shooting. During an early evening news briefing, police named a person of interest, Frank James, who is believed to have rented the U-Haul vehicle. Police said they recovered the key to the van at the crime scene and it had been rented in Philadelphia.
The U-Haul key at the scene led us to the recovery of a U-Haul van a short while ago in Brooklyn. The male who we believe is the renter of this U-Haul in Philadelphia is a Frank R. James, male, 62 years old, with addresses in Wisconsin and Philadelphia.
In his comment regarding the shooting, President Joe Biden said he was not letting up until the gunman is found.
My team has been in touch with Mayor Adams and New York's police commissioner, and the Department of Justice and the FBI are working closely with the NYPD on the ground. We're going to continue to stay in close contact with New York authorities, and as we learn more about the situation over the coming hours and days. And something could have broken between now and the last hour. I haven't heard the news. I haven't spoken to anyone of my staff. But we're not letting up on it until we find out and we find the perpetrator.
Police believe the gunman acted alone. He is described by police as a man of heavy build, wearing a green construction-type vest and a hooded sweatshirt.
VOA correspondent Trina Trin joins us now for an update from New York. Hi, Tina. Now, hours have passed since the shooting. Where are we at with the person of interest who's been identified as possibly linked to the U-Haul truck found in Brooklyn?
Well, that person of interest has actually been upgraded to a suspect. So they now classified as a suspect. Frank R. James is still at large, and FBI has set up a website asking any witnesses to contribute information, videos, anything that they may have that may lead to the arrest of Frank R. James, who is now considered a suspect. There is a $50,000 reward for any information.
So he's now a suspect. Well, because he was previously a person of interest. But is the police also looking for anyone else who could be connected to this case? Because earlier they said they believe this was an isolated incident. I mean, the now suspect, probably acted alone.
Yeah, as far as we know, no accomplice aided Frank James in this case. You know, that's still under investigation, but so far it appears that he acted alone.
And Tina, this again raises the question of gun rights, gun laws in the United States, and it is interesting it's happening 2 days after the crackdown on ghost guns. How relatable is that in light of what happened on Tuesday?
Well, there's definitely been a heightened awareness of safety just in general in the city. We've seen the headlines of an uptick in crime around New York City, and this comes at a time when more and more people are starting to get back on the subways, to go back to work in person at their offices in Manhattan. Mayor Adams has called for stronger gun laws and continues to say that this is part of a larger effort that needs to be happening across the country, not just in New York. But you know, he has promised to double the number of safety patrol officers in the subways of New York City. At this point in time, the subways still are running and have been since 2 a.m. Service has been restored to that particular subway station in Brooklyn at 36th Street.
Do we know how people in that area feel hearing about the shooting and their safety, and this is going forward?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you know, definitely a little bit rattled today as people get back on the trains. But in terms of ridership, this is definitely not where it's at. Where it was at pre-pandemic levels, but we have been noticing more and more people getting back on their trains. I mean, the New York City subways are really the lifeline of New York City. They transport millions of people every day to home, to work, to school, and so they continue to be, you know, a vital necessity of everyday life in New York City. So people definitely have a heightened sense of awareness for their safety today, but that doesn't mean necessarily that they're not riding the subway and continuing to ride the trains.
Tina, let's talk about the victims of the shooting. As of yesterday, the police said a number of them are critical but not life-threatening, but now we're hearing there have been a few deaths.
Yes, as far as I know, there were 10 who suffered gunshot injuries, gunshot wounds, and 13 more who suffered various injuries from smoke inhalation and panic attacks. There were 4 children on board. The youngest was 12 years old, and the oldest being 46 years old. Still very, it's all continuing to develop, but the majority of these victims did not sustain any life-threatening injuries.
Tina Trin, thanks again for speaking with us, and keep us updated on developments in New York.
Thank you.
He is no stranger to apologies, especially over those parties attended during the strict lockdown in Britain in 2020. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is back to talking about the fine slammed on him and his financial minister on Tuesday. On that day, he said in a video that he had accepted the fine by the police, adding that he fell short and that people had the right to expect better.
Today, I've received a fixed penalty notice from the Metropolitan Police relating to an event in Downing Street on the 19th of June 2020. And let me say immediately that I've paid the fine, and I once again offer a full apology. And in a spirit of openness and humility, I want to be completely clear about what happened on that date. My day began shortly after 7 a.m. and I chaired 8 meetings in number 10, including the Cabinet Committee deciding COVID strategy. I visited a school in Hemel Hempstead, which took me out of Downing Street for over 4 hours. And amongst all these engagements, on a day that happened to be my birthday, there was a brief gathering in the Cabinet room shortly after 2 p.m, lasting for less than 10 minutes, during which people I work with kindly passed on their good wishes. And I have to say, in all frankness, at that time, it did not occur to me that this might have been a breach of the rules. But of course, the police have found otherwise, and I fully respect the outcome of their investigation. I understand the anger that many will feel that I myself fell short when it came to observing the very rules which the government I lead had introduced to protect the public. and I accept in all sincerity that people had the right to expect better. And now I feel an even greater sense of obligation to deliver on the priorities of the British people.
Police had been investigating 12 gatherings at Mr. Johnson's Downing Street office and the Cabinet Office after a damning internal inquiry found his staff had enjoyed alcohol-fueled parties that were not permitted. Johnson said he had attended some of the events.
Well, there's no convincing Britons on this one. Many Londoners voiced their dismay following news of the fines imposed. Mr. Johnson has since apologized and confirmed he's paid the fine, but says it not occurred to him that at the time that he was in breach of the rules. Opposition parties have called for Johnson and Finance Minister Rishi Sunak to resign.
Firstly, it's such a nominal fee for what is something that's going to offend everyone in this country so profoundly. I'm amongst many people, well, compared to many people, I haven't had to make that many sacrifices over lockdown and over the last few years. But I wasn't able to be there when my grandma died in hospital, and he was there partying with his friends. Yeah, it's not only breaking the law, it's lies, hypocrisy, and it's just the latest in the series of things that we've been seeing over the last few years of Boris Johnson. So yeah, it's not too soon for him to be asked to resign by not only the Tories, but the country.
There doesn't seem to be very much point in having a code if you're not going to abide by the code. It's as simple as that, you know. People have an obligation, if they're going to sit in positions of power, authority, to play by the rules. There are certainly some very specific rules about what you can and can't do. Those rules have been broken, and there are consequences. Why is it that those consequences don't appear to matter very much when you apply them to Richie, Carrie, or Boris?
Simple. I think they should just pay the fine, and as such, they are guilty for breaking the law, and they should pay the penalty, which is basically they should resign from Parliament. And fortunately for them, Ukraine came to the rescue. I thought the whole thing was forgotten, but I'm glad to hear that's it's still active, so they should pay the penalty and do the decent thing. And I think they should stop underestimating the ordinary people. I think they take people for a fool.
Well, the thoughts and opinions of people living in London. Our correspondent Juliana Laika joins us now. Juliana, does anyone accept the Prime Minister's response, his apology, or his explanation for the breach during the lockdown?
Well, Amarachi, if we look at a Snap poll that was conducted yesterday, 60% of Britons believe that Prime Minister Boris Johnson should resign, and 70% believe that he misled Parliament. And even though I think you listen to the mood music in the room, it doesn't appear as if the Prime Minister will be pushed out of office. Ultimately, it does lie in the hands of the Conservative government, and many of whom seem to have been rallying around the Prime Minister today. We had Grant Shapps, the Transport Minister, speaking to British media, and he said, look, you know, even though he completely disagrees with what the Prime Minister has done, he thinks he should be getting on with the job, that he's only human. We've seen a raft of cabinet ministers also praising the Prime Minister's leadership, not just in kind of leading the international coalition in Ukraine, but also, of course, rolling out the coronavirus vaccine. So that appears to be on the surface how the Conservative Party feel. But of course, there is a lot of anger. The Prime Minister is the chief police officer, if you like, of the ministerial code. And if you lie to Parliament, especially if you're going to get a criminal offence, you committed a criminal offence within that, you should face the consequences. And for many people, the consequences are he should resign or be sacked.
So he of course, but that's not likely to happen. He's like the cat with 9 lives. He's likely to scale through this, and that's because there's enough distracting Britons at this time. As you might mentioned, the Ukraine, which came along, and then other issues that he has to still steer the British people out of. How peculiar, however, is the situation that he's in right now, being that he still has to lead Britain through this war on the continent, and then steady the leadership of the country?
Yes, I don't think it's going to be as easy as it has been previously for the Prime Minister. We are in obviously very tense times at the moment, not just because of Britain's proximity to the war in Ukraine, but as you said, we're going through our own domestic challenges. Inflation is at a 30-year high. The cost of living squeeze is making it tough for Britons, and people are really struggling at the moment. But I think the British public haven't been fooled. They're able to differentiate between the war in Ukraine and Partygate, and there are potentially more fines to come. Remember, there are a string of parties, which I heard Millicent mentioning, and this is just one party that we know the Prime Minister attended, or gathering, as you say. But these fixed penalty notices have been coming in drips and drabs. If there are more, are we going to be able to accept another apology from the Prime Minister? I think it's also worth bearing in mind, Amarachi, that a very senior Tory, the ex-Brexit Minister, Lord David Frost, who's always been an ally of the Prime Minister, did say that he hopes when Parliament returns on Tuesday, because it's in an Easter recess, they're not sitting at the moment, when it returns, that the Prime Minister will put on record, correct the record in front of the House to make sure that the claims he had previously made can be rectified. So I don't think it's over just yet. And even if we talk about a cat having 9 lives, surely the Prime Minister has gone beyond that.
When you say correct the record, especially with Parliament, would it be right to say that Johnson and Sunak are perhaps the first sitting Prime Minister and Chancellor to be criminally sanctioned in the UK?
Yes, so we know that the Prime Minister is the first Prime Minister in history to be sanctioned by the police. However, there have been some comparisons to this fixed penalty notice being like a speeding ticket. That's one line that a Tory minister was trying to spin on social media today. And also, some people are saying that perhaps, and the Prime Minister said in his own words, he didn't knowingly do it on purpose. It's important that you mentioned the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, who we know has had a tumultuous week. He has had a very fast rise to political leadership, and unfortunately, him and his family have had a torrent of abuse from the British media about legal evasion of tax that the wife has been receiving, as well as the Chancellor also holding a green card whilst being a British finance minister. And there are some suggestions that that discussion actually got to the White House. He has since given back his green card, but there's lots of discussions about his future. There were some suggestions that yesterday he was going to resign, but he was asked not to because it would look bad on the Prime Minister. It's just not looking right for this Conservative Party at the moment, particularly when so many people are going through so much hardship. It's supposed to be a party of law and order, but unfortunately it's been sleaze after sleaze, allegation after allegation. Yes, people do know that the Prime Minister is human, and people do like him. Of course, we saw that with his overwhelming victory. But unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives in this country. COVID-19 affected so many people, and the fact that the custodian of the law was breaking it repeatedly is just not good enough for some people. Some people think, no, he has to go, and we will just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I remember when we were discussing this story before we came into the studio, a colleague of mine did mention the British people whitewashing, the story and trying to make it seem like, this is normal. I mean, Johnson is only human at the end of the day. But there's also his wife who's also been fined. Has she paid the fine as well? And we're expecting about 50 more, according to the Met Police.
Yes, so Carrie Simons, another popular name in British tabloid press, the wife of the Prime Minister, she too received a fine. I believe there were some suggestions that perhaps this could have been her second fine. Of course, they have all been paid, but, there are, again, discussions about the goings-on within Downing Street and Whitehall, and how much, this red wine is going to stain the political future of Britain, and how much shame Boris Johnson has put to the office. And unfortunately, over the past, I would say, 24 months, there have been so many stories about backstabbing and scheming that has involved Carrie Simons. And again, unfortunately for her, she's been brought up in this. Boris Johnson always says you shouldn't, get family members involved, which is true. But then, of course, look what happened to the Chancellor a couple of days ago. It just doesn't look good, and it smells really bad. And I think it's safe to say that Boris Johnson, whether he survives this or not, has certainly lost the trust of the British public.
Thanks, Juliana. Do enjoy the rest of your evening. Our London correspondent, Juliana Leinka, joining us from London. Coming up after the break, it's the world's oldest gorilla, marking 65 years on Earth.
She's lived a long life. A really long life.
It's her birthday. Stay with us. We have that and more.
Welcome back to the program. Still keeping our eyes on the elections in France. And the second round coming up on the 24th. French President Emmanuel Macron has denied, however, there's any wider political agreement with former Conservative President Nicolas Sarkozy over his endorsement of Macron ahead of the second round on April 24. French media have speculated that Macron, who will need a new majority after legislative elections later this year following the presidential vote, obtained Sarkozy's endorsement after offering political influence in return. Speaking to France 2 television a day after Sarkozy endorsed him, Mr. Macron said there is no agreement. His endorsement, that Sarkozy's endorsement, will help Macron attract voters who backed the Conservatives candidate Valérie Pécresse in the first round of the election, but it could also deter left-wing voters who will see it as a confirmation that Macron is as right-wing as Sarkozy. The 67-year-old Sarkozy is France's last Conservative president and is still seen as an influential figure in the centre-right Les Républicains party. However, the very existence of Les Républicains would now appears under threat after many of his voters backed Macron or Le Pen in Sunday's first round.
So talking elections away from France, Hong Kong's outgoing deputy leader John Lee has filed his candidacy for the May leadership election. The former chief secretary said he has received support from 786 of the election committee's 1,500 members, far exceeding the 188 nominations required to run. He is the first person to announce his intention to run. 64-year-old Lee resigned last week ahead of his bid to replace outgoing Chief Executive Carrie Lam, whose 5-year term ends on June 30. Lam oversaw one of the most stormy periods in Hong Kong history, with pro-democracy demonstrations and coronavirus.
They have, in general, supported the three directions, which is use a result-oriented approach to solve problems, to enhance the competitiveness of Hong Kong, and also to consolidate a firm foundation for the development of Hong Kong. I think members agree with these three directions, That is why they have given me the nomination. But it is hard effort.
Brazil's former leftist president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has promised the country's indigenous people he would stop illegal mining on their reservations and recognize their land claims if he wins the presidential election coming up in October. Lula visited a protest camp in Brasilia, where thousands of members of 200 tribes have gathered to oppose plans by far-right President Jair Bolsonaro to allow commercial agriculture, mining and oil exploration on their lands. Bolsonaro is trailing Lula in early polls ahead of the October 2nd election. The president vowed in 2018 not to recognize a single centimeter of indigenous reservation land, winning him the backing of Brazil's powerful farm lobby. Indigenous leaders called on Lula to rebuild the government's Indigenous Affairs Agency, FUNAI, which has had its funding cut and staff depleted under Bolsonaro. A report published on Monday showed illegal mining grew 46% on the Yanomami reservation last year, as high gold prices and tacit support from Bolsonaro set off a gold rush, bringing disease, violence and rights abuses.
In Africa, the death toll in the South African province of KwaZulu-Natal has reached more than 250 after devastating floods wreaked havoc in the area. Local authorities are calling for a state of disaster to be declared after some areas saw months' worth of rainfall in one day. Officials have called it one of the worst weather storms in history of the country. Mudslides have trapped people under buildings, with more floods expected. There are reports that the rescue effort is being hampered by poor visibility as a helicopter continues to bring people back to safety. On Tuesday, the BBC witnessed one such search operation for a 10-year-old girl who was part of a family of 4 swept away on a flooded bridge.
Well, further north, 10 people have died and 14 others have been injured in a traffic accident in Egypt involving a tourist bus. Reports say 5 Egyptians, 4 French people and 1 Belgian were killed in the crash in the Aswan region, said to have involved a collision with a lorry. Aswan is a tourism hub near the ancient Egyptian temples of Abu Simbel.
Libya has held a ceremony at the Museum of Libya in Tripoli to showcase 9 ancient artifacts that were returned by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Although recovering cultural artifacts seems extremely difficult, the director of the UN's Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute is proud of the Libyan authorities for their immersed efforts.
Libyan authorities have received 9 ancient artifacts, including stone heads, urns and pottery, that were returned by the United States after being smuggled out of the North African country. All the pieces had been illegally excavated and shipped to the United States, but they were identified by archaeologists working with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in New York and have been returned to the Museum of Libya in Tripoli. The pottery includes patterned jars. All the pieces are now in the museum located in the central Tripoli palace of King Idris, who was ousted in 1969 and which has been closed to the public since the 2011 uprising. Once a major province of the Roman Empire and home to spectacular coastal ruins, Libya has a wealth of archaeological sites and its museums boast an array of ancient treasure. However, during the years of chaos that have followed the 2011 NATO-backed uprising, some of its museums were looted and numerous sites were pillaged by treasure hunters digging in the ground. Director of the United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute, Antonia Maria de Meo, says he appreciates the effort of the Libyan authorities.
We are very proud to work with the Libyan authorities for the return of these really important cultural antiquities today. The process to return cultural antiquities is incredibly complex. It requires massive partnership. In this case, there was a partnership with the U.S. authorities. The Manhattan DA's office was involved in a criminal investigation that uncovered these particular works. And then there was a cooperation on the U.S. side to the Libyan consulate in Washington, D.C. And we were involved behind the scenes, working also together with the Lermo to coordinate this and also with the NGO to manage the transportation and delivery. As you can tell, there's many actors required, but when we work together for cooperation, we're able to actually achieve a success like today.
After major antiquities looting following the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 and in Syria during the war after its own 2011 uprising, militant groups raised money by trading in antiquities, drawing greater involvement from police.
There she is, Fatou, as she is best known, the oldest known gorilla in the world, and she's 65 today. There she is going for the rice and cottage cheese and vegetables and fruit that make her birthday cake.
Yum.
Fatou arrived at the zoo, that's the zoo in Berlin, when she was only 2 years old. Imagine how little she was then. A statement from the zoo says for her exceptionally advanced age, Fatou is a decidedly spry old lady with a healthy appetite. Watch her eat. We're happy to have her with us every day and hope to celebrate a few more birthdays with her.
To celebrate Fatou's special day, the zoo organized a cozy coffee party for Fatou and her family. The birthday cake, you saw her tasting, she's still on it, made of rice, cottage cheese, vegetables and fruit. She lives with her son, 4 daughters and a grandchild.
Gorillas, as we know, are the largest apes and can weigh up to 200 kilograms.
But there are reports that she came to Berlin in quite an unusual way, so she might be older than 65.
She may have come from Africa for all we know. I mean, she's strong, she's agile. You know, they talk about how like she's a human being. She has a son, she has 4 daughters and a grandchild. Yeah, someone said to call her Queen Kong. I don't know about that. But at 200 kilograms, I assure you, she is not trying to lose weight. Not at all. Nothing to worry about. Go ahead and eat that rice, cottage cheese, vegetables.
It's her birthday after all.
And fruit, Fatou. You have nothing to lose.
That's Now in the World Today. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.
And I'm Amarachi Ubani.